Good afternoon and namaste. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Shankar. I will hear from the panelists in a minute. So I'm the founder and CEO of FRSLABS, and FRS stands for Fraud, Risk and Security. So as the name suggests, so we sort of specialize in fraud prevention, IT verification, and privacy solutions. So the topic for today is sort of role of AI in enabling safe payments at scale. I think all of this is sort of gravitating towards the billion-a-day architecture. I think when entrepreneurs and startups build for solutions such as this, so we think of small-scale deployments, but anyone who's even thinking of payments now will have to start thinking at billion transactions a day. So we're already witnessing sort of exponential growth, but we'll sort of hear from the panelists sort of the impact that is actually having on us as a society. I think we're in for a treat here. So we have Karthik from Billdesk. I don't think anyone would have made a payment and not noticed this sort of orange logo somewhere on your screen. So he's here, and we have two incumbents sort of challenging the big players, Rupesh from OneCard and Visham from Goals 101, part of M2P. So I'll now pass on the mantle to the panelists. So we'll start from Visham. So introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Visham Sikand. I hope I'm audible. A passer from Harvard Business School, did my AI from Berkeley, and run a company called Goals 101, which got acquired by M2P last year. Been a serial entrepreneur. This is my third exit.
Hi, good morning. I'm Karthik Ganapathy, and thank you, Shankar, for the lovely introduction, and welcome to all of you. The topic is, of course, a fairly generic one, and I hope it generates a lot of interest depending on the kind of questions that get tossed around. I used to be a consultant for about 5 years, then started Billdesk, and over the past 20 years, I've been working at different legs of the payment journey. We've created solutions, we've created services, technology, architectures, platforms, and happy to be here.
Hi, my name is Rupesh Kumar. I'm the co-founder of OneCard. It's a co-branded credit card that we run in partnership with banks. Before that, I used to work in ICICI. I have been sort of in the Fintech industry ever since I passed out of college. Few years in finance, 6 or 7 years, investor relations, corporate strategy, and then in technology as a software engineer, and then as an entrepreneur now.
Okay, so we'll move on to the questions. So mine is the easy part. So I think from cash to credit cards to sort of QR codes, I think we've come a long way. But we're not talking about this new kid around the block, which is AI transformers. So we're not talking about the normal neural networks, but these generative AIs, which has like human level intelligence. So with that, so the first question to Karthik is: so can you give us a sense of the digital payment revolution that we've seen so far, and then with the billion-day architecture, so what can we expect the payments to go through in the next couple of years?
So when I think about when we started and where we are today, it is quite fascinating that there was a time when there used to be just a few hundred payments an entire month. And here we are talking about a billion-a-day architecture, and the thought process that there will be over a billion transactions processed in a day. In fact, even the fact that a billion transactions are getting processed over a month was unfathomable, but today with UPI and different other payment modes, that's become a reality, and there are several players doing it. The couple of thoughts that I have with respect to the topic itself is to expand a bit on what does it really mean when you say a billion and when it is something else. A billion, literally, if you just take the 24 hours in a day, it is about 12,000 transactions per second. And that is if you're just distributing it over. If you look at peaks and so on, typically one takes a ratio of 5. So it is about at least 60,000 transactions per second that any system has to capacitate for it to be able to process. Even as one imagines that, I remember the days when there were a few transactions a day and you didn't have to really follow the three-tier architecture. There used to be just one server that's processing everything. But over the years, what we've seen is transaction architectures evolve to be defined as per global financial standards that require different layers in the way a process has to be run, different kinds of technologies that sit in between that peruse the transaction right down from a network to a sub-network to a perimeter to a internal to a logging to different kinds of layers. And then the whole microservices architecture-led enhancements and innovations that came, right? All these things have really made a billion a day possible. But I think by far, in terms of the AI context, the one thought that I want to put out is you could basically have automation handle scale, right? That's how it has been. There was no scale, then came automation. But with very large scale, with very high extreme scale, you need learning to happen, which is also now happening. But beyond that, you need cognition to work. And that's where I think AI comes in. So the role of AI in a very, very extremely high processing environment could basically be broken up into all the micro elements that happen when a process is being run of a transaction, whether it is about receiving it, signature validating it, routing it, in terms of the key things that are important when you have a large set of transactions, which is scalability of your systems, the availability of your systems, the performance, whether the latency is as minimal as possible, and then of course the real-time customer data analytics that you're able to do, and last but most important, security. So that is what AI will play, and as we talk more, we can try and understand what exactly can AI really do in these areas.
Thank you, that was impressive. With a lot of transactions, I think the next question is to Rupesh. So with a lot of transactions comes obviously a lot of fraud, a lot of trust issues. I think like my dad says, if I have to give you $100, I give you $100 and end of story. But the problem is, what if something goes wrong when I actually do a digital payment? The current mechanism of raise an issue, go to a bank branch, call an IVR. So those things are creating a lot of anxiety, particularly to a demographic at least at this moment now, which is sort of putting them off and stopping them from using the solution completely. So the question really is, can AI reverse this trend, and can it actually instill a level of learning and trust within this payment ecosystem?
So I'll try to explain why fraud is such a difficult problem, especially in the context of transactions. Just to give some numbers, last year, according to the RBI's annual report, there were 30,000 fraudulent transactions reported, by all the payment system players. If you take that as a proportion of number of digital transactions, so 30,000 divided by 160 billion, even if you assume that the 30,000 is underreported by 1,000 times, that still makes fraudulent transactions as 0.01% of total number of transactions. So 99.99% transactions are fine, 0.01% transactions are fraudulent. The problem really is who gets defrauded. The people who get defrauded are the most vulnerable sections of the society, for example, senior citizens. So the impact on their lives is disproportionate. So when you're talking about fraud, why do you have to solve for 0.01%? One, because it reduces trust in the system. But two, who gets impacted because of that, right? And I'll go back a little bit on how historically we have been trying to solve this problem. I'm sure you would have noticed it whenever you do a transaction which is out of line with what you usually do, you get an IVR call from your bank asking you to confirm the transaction. Did you do this transaction, right? It's fine today. But when you do billion a day, that can't scale, right? So how do you solve this? it's really a hard problem. Plus, we have the problem of what we call false positives. If you start declining a lot of transactions, good customers will start getting impacted, because of transactions getting declined. So really, there are two things that need to be done. One, how do you get everybody to collaborate to make sure that the same fraudster is not able to defraud customers across financial institutions? So there has to be some kind of central fraud repository. It has nothing to do with AI, by the way. But the second part is the model part on how do you model fraudulent transactions. And as I explained, the really difficult part is if 0.01% transactions are fraudulent, it's very hard for fraud models to catch these, because the number of transactions which are fraudulent is very small as a proportion of total number of transactions. So historically, we have used rules, heuristics, some amount of machine learning models to do this. But a really exciting field of research that is happening on the AI side here is a class of deep learning models which are called GANs. So you guys can look up on the Google. It's a very simple concept. But GAN stands for Generative Adversarial Network. And what it does is it essentially runs two neural networks side by side. One neural network is trying to generate good transactions as if they were real transactions. And the second one is trying to figure out if they were, fraud. So these two are running at the same time, and it has two implications. One, now you can generate a lot of synthetic transactions to simulate real-life behavior, as well as try to figure out if they are fraudulent or not. I just before coming here, I was trying to look at how many papers got published on GANs in the last 4 years. There were 400 papers on archive.org on just GANs. But still there's not, a model which can do it for all of us. So I guess, what we're saying is we have a path to a solution, but we don't have a solution yet. There's a lot of experimentation happening in the field. Maybe we'll catch up, because that's the only way you can scale this. $1 billion a day can't happen unless you have, good models trying to figure out.
True. I think a lot, we'll get to it in subsequent time, is also social engineering issues that we're seeing now. Okay, the next question is to Visham. So AI obviously is the word of the century. I don't think you would have not heard anywhere in this complex. You must be sort of full of it for the last couple of days. I think 10 years ago, AI probably had the brain of an insect. So it was very primitive. It could do repetitive stuff, really good stuff. But what we're seeing now is sort of intelligence at human level. So at this rate, I think it's inevitable that we're going to see super intelligent machines that can talk in several languages, compose music, create art, and do all sorts of things. So the question really is, with this backdrop and as an incumbent sort of dealing with a lot of data, so can you give us the kind of AI innovations that are sort of going on at Goals 101?
So one of the things, if you go to a US board these days, they say that if you're not investing into AI or India, you're doing something wrong. So with that context, so the way like what Rupesh just said, that there are 0.01% of the transactions being fraud, I have a common question to all of you. Has someone in your family or friends recently in the last 6 months been affected by a fraud? When I asked this in a forum, I've had literally 7 out of 10 people say, yes, I have a relative, I got a call. So data has two aspects. One is to see the end outcome by number, and one is to see the value. For someone, that 5 lakh rupees could be life-changing. It could be just impacting them crazily. So that, the reason why I changed as a speaker from my partner over here, because I think this is the most sensitive topic for all of us. All of us in India, there's a naive population of about 80% who doesn't understand what a link means today also. So while players like Billdesk have done an amazing job, but there are people who do not understand whether this link is authentic or there's something wrong about what we're going to do next, right? So I think it's a huge problem. It cannot be just put aside by saying that AI solves it. There's a lot of things around AI. So for a lot of people who want to understand what AI is, it is statistics multiplied by a code. You just put a good statistician around it. You make a coder sit with them. You can have machine learning models around it. Machine learning is a little more evolved as AI. Very simple. What we do is we process about 12 million transactions literally a day to understand how you're transacting. giving you some interesting statistics. So if you give me 2 years of your transaction data, with approximately 80% or 85% probability, I can tell you what your next transaction is going to be, in which brand, and approximately what value. So that's scary, I understand, but it's not that scary, it's good also. So let's say we reach 1 billion transactions. These transactions were still happening offline. People were doing it on cash, people were doing it in some other form or other. The good thing is when you're bringing this digitally, a statistician like me understands that, okay, you know, this kind of transaction can lead to an AML problem, an anti-money laundering problem, or this transaction link going to this kind of a person of this age group sitting in this town can have a challenge. So I love the new punchline that Apple phone has today. It says we protect your privacy. So for players like Rupesh and Karthik over here, I suggest the new punchline for companies like theirs should not only be just protecting your privacy, it should be protecting your data, protecting how you can not be defrauded. Imagine a player coming and saying that, hey, you know what, if a link comes from Billdesk, you go there and you scan it in a central depository, we will tell you that this is a fair link. This kind of repository, which Rupesh was kind of trying to hint to, is required in India, in which every link that comes to us, to my father, to your parents, to your relatives, who do not understand this, have to understand this is a fair link. AI can really automate this completely. What does AI do? It'll understand how to automate all this. It'll understand that this person requires visual recognition as a form of authenticating. Somebody would require an OVR form. There are multiple forms. So in short, like what NPCI has done, disruption of digital payments, there is a central authority required to authenticate the kind of links that we all getting. I can, with full kind of confidence, say that 9 out of 10 people sitting here would have got a fraudulent link once or maybe more in the last 3 months itself. If that's the case, this problem is a lot more serious. Players who are big enough, like the players on my right, should, I think, invest a lot more in the skill of, in the side of saying that, you know what, if this link is coming from us, it is protected by different layers of whatever blockchains or whatever central repositories of the government, which allows us to say, okay, guys, now in India, if I click a link, it has to be safe. So in short, it is totally possible, doable, and we can work together to make that happen. And all of you will feel a lot more safer with your digital payments, especially your parents.
I think there was a new dry regulation that's sort of coming up saying every link should also be registered now.
That'll be wonderful, actually.
So, I mean, we are already...
a big work, but that'll be wonderful for a lot of people.
Yeah. So there's already, when banks, insurance, telcos actually send out SMS messages, the SMS has to be registered so that we all know that. But they are now saying that if there's links within those SMS, even those links will have to be registered and vetted before it comes out. So we'll have to see. The tokens change all the time, so we'll have to see what kind of wildcard link that we can add. My next question is to Karthik. So I think this is sort of relevant for entrepreneurs or even thinking of sort of building your own company. I read somewhere that the next $1 billion app is not going to come from a large company or not even a startup. So it's going to come from one guy, or maybe even a student still studying there. I know there are a lot of regulations and sort of a lot of plumbing work involved in building a complex app such as payments. But do you think that it's possible that a kid using AI will come up with an app that will challenge all of the incumbents in sort of extraordinary ways?
Well, I think definitely a kid coming out of college is not going to create anything that is functional that can be of scale, because that's likely to get fairly easily copied and moved out. I want to backtrack a bit on the topic that was discussed on fraud, right? I think in all situations, if you have the adequate amount of data, and that's what you're also saying, Visham's also saying, you will know that a transaction is a valid, genuine transaction or whether it's a fraud. And some of the techniques of deep learning, etc., AI training, AI clearly allow for that kind of discovery to happen in a real-time kind of basis. But the real question is that, is it some kind of AI monster that we are looking to do? Like, as a processor, we only get to see one small siloed version of the data. We don't get to see who's transacting, we don't get to see who's receiving the money. And therefore, our scope and gambit is all what is happening between those rails. Similarly, there could be a bank that is potentially cribbing about the fact that they don't have visibility into where the end transaction is going through. Now, if we were to put all this together, then yes, the accuracy of the model can increase from, let's say, 85% to perhaps a 95%. And at the same time, everyone could feel safe. But then the question is that, is everyone safe? Because you are really creating pools of data that are not potentially safe at one level, everything being at one place. So we can debate that. Coming back to a billion user kind of an app, individual, no, but in areas where it involves some absolutely super tech, which is, let's say, you're creating test models for training AIs, or you're creating platforms that help remove bias from how AI is going to behave, or platforms that help provide privacy buckets to people in a manner that they can share but yet not share, right? So these are areas where I think there could be some really heavy kind of individual contribution. Otherwise, it's going to be the big companies that will just keep taking the cake and eating it. There's no question about it.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed here. I mean, any of you who's listening, I think you can challenge him. I still believe that the next big app is going to be built by sort of some folks sitting here. I'm probably one of you guys who's actually going to be build a $1 billion app, not on your own, but with the help of AI. So just as a follow-on to Rupesh, so I think on the earlier fraud piece as well, I think the lot of trust issues with citizens is actually not the kind of fraud that we would expect, but it's social engineering. So someone calling you as as somebody from your office in distress, they need some money, so and then you sort of fall prey to that. So it's very easily done. But but with billion transactions, I think it's going to go exponentially very high. But do you really think that smart AI agents could be sort of sitting somewhere in the middle, which can identify this kind of frauds and stop it before it happens?
So, sir, as I said, in our experience, the models are not there yet. The false positive rate is too high. But what seems to have worked, from our previous experience in working in banks and then in this company, is what we call human in the loop sort of AI, where you keep the human in the loop to figure out whether a transaction is fraudulent or not. And I'll just give you an example, which is a beautiful example, which works at a very high scale. I'm sure a lot of you use Truecaller, right? It's very, very popular. It's not an accident that Truecaller is popular in India, right? Because we have spams and frauds and everything around going on. They have a very wonderful way of telling you that a call is spam, right? The screen becomes red. So even for a person who does not understand, fraud and all that, you can figure out that this transaction is probably fraudulent or this call is probably a spam because the screen becomes red. What if, you involve the user in a transaction, and when the user is authenticating the transaction, you give visual cues. Those cues could be powered by, agents, etc. So what you're giving is you are giving the control back to the user, saying that, hey, I think this transaction is probably fraudulent, but why don't you decide, right? So you give visual cues to the user. I think a mix of, some AI models and with a human in the loop is probably the solution that could work. Full-scale AI, I am not really confident at the moment.
We'll have to wait and see. I mean, this really is. I mean, the next question to Sham is really sort of fighting AI with AI. So much as how businesses are looking at AI and sort of trying to use AI to persuade customers to sort of buy more, or I mean, do whatever they prefer to do, but could customers sort of turn it around? I think the example that I can think of is customers can use AI, let's say, to predict supply and demand, and then get the cheapest price regardless of the time they're booking, let's say, a cab or a flight. So it's businesses using AI to sort of persuade me to increase the price dynamically, but I, as a customer on the other side, also using AI to sort of predict what the business is predicting and then sort of trying to defeat that. But do you think that sort of AI is going to be around in a year's time?
First of all, the answer to AI is genuinely powerful because it's truly automated and learns on its own. Just to encourage the youngsters here, I'll give you a small story about the AI next app coming in. So all of you must have heard of the company called Zepto. So the founders were 20 years old, studying in Stanford. So whatever I've heard from Nexus Venture Partner, who are my investors too. So they came to their office in US and they said, hey, we have built an algorithm which is simulated data. And we think we can, in US, which takes 45 to 50 minutes to deliver through Uber Eats, we can get a delivery done in 20 minutes in Palo Alto area. And in Palo Alto, you do not have literally you don't have a driver also to come to you. And the simulated algorithm is something that they proved through it was simulated with data which was not real, and they said, finally when we reach scale, we'll be able to do this in any country that we go to. And they were asked to come back to India. So today, Zepto got their first round of funding on an algorithm. So back in India, it's a $5 billion company. So yes, there will be exceptions, but whoever are here who are young, who want to build things just basis an AI algorithm, they are players who are ready to back it up. And that changes the game to some of them. Coming back to the fact that whether it's a manual intervention required or not, so in the data world, the punchline is data greater than opinion, right? So opinion is from an individual and data learns it on its own. So I believe the fraudsters, the people who want to do wrong, are always a step ahead than the people who think. So they will always be able to, for example, in my office, somebody told me that they now get a video call from a friend saying, I'm sitting in a police station and I have a problem. I don't know if any of you have faced that. In which it's your friend talking there and it looks like, hey, he's seeking, or it's his voice. And nobody had solutions to this, right? So only once this came in, then manually people start saying, hey, we have to find a solution to this kind of fraud. While a machine will immediately say, hey, you know what, these are the 3 things that we think have gone out of context in the past. So before that happens, so it's preventive. A lot of AI can allow prevention to happen rather than post facto. So obviously there has to be angles where there are sensitive issues, there are privacy issues where AI has to have manual interventions. But I believe a majority of the problems in advance and post facto should be automatically solved by AI, and AI has that power. It's not as difficult and scary word as we all think that we're building something scary. It is simple maths, which we used to otherwise build on a computer. We used to code it. Just that the new terminology coming out and the power of it and the speed of it is so high that we all thinking, oh, this is moving faster than what probably our brain is thinking. And that's what it's supposed to be. Your brain is neurons, and over here, these are signals to the code, and that's what it does. So yes, I think automation, majority AI is the way forward.
I'm pretty sure I will have some kind of plugin in my browser which can sort of analyze my behavior, and then it can help me book tickets, cabs, whatever I'm trying to do, just trying to defeat the other AI on the other system, which is sort of trying to persuade me to do what it's trying to do. Anyway, so the next question really is, I think I'll open it up. So maybe to Karthik. So we're seeing QR code as an explosion. I think for the last 2-3 years, that's been the talk of the town. But what do you think is sort of next after, or what do you think is going to come after QR?
I think QR, the potential of QR has still probably not been completely, used as of now. When QR was initially introduced, I do recall that there was a fair bit of consternation in the ecosystem around how standardization of the QR could happen, how it could accommodate multiple payment methods and the various network-led interactions that could be all managed and related standards, the adoption by merchants. There was a lot of debate and deliberation that happened around it. And I think what really happened is that QR became a success because the people who had to adopt it, which is primarily the merchants and the customers, they started doing it. There was a point in time, pretty much after COVID, that because it was available everywhere and literally any person is carrying the QR and telling you that, hey, you don't have anything, don't give me cash, here is the code and just pay me here. And visually it appeals to a person like how you said the green button, right? So I think QR is pretty much phenomenal in all those aspects. If I were to extend it in another dimension, perhaps touch may be one other way to really go about figuring out if payment authorizations could happen. The need for any of these will mean that you need to know who you're paying, how much you're paying. So that is a very important aspect. And if that is something that is flashed to you, and if you're basically, I'm not so sure about voice at this point in time because that has its own set of trust-led parameters, but potentially touch could be a way. Touch and the physical presence of somebody could well be a mode of payment.
So you think that I can walk into a store, buy anything, walk out, and then everything is sorted out?
You would like that experience, wouldn't you?
I think we're not too far, so I would be able to sort of walk into a coffee shop, get a coffee, and not worry about thinking about anything, and it will automatically get deducted from my wallet. So it could sort of analyze the whole of myself and
no different than when you pass a toll booth. You don't want to
exactly,
wait right? You just want the AI to, which I think is already happening in several places.
In California, most of the stores, you don't need to
India
go
also.
and put your thing. You put it in your cart, you go out, and it bills automatically to you.
True. Yeah. So we are already seeing those things. Anyway, so we're coming to the end of it. So maybe a couple of questions here. So I'm pretty sure everybody's sort of trying to do something with AI agents, GPTs, and so on. But is there anything crazy that you're trying to do, or have you tried anything that AI has not exactly gone to plan?
So we were trying to, the really strong case for AI in our company has been on customer service. It's a very obvious use case. We tried lots of different things, but we figured out probably this is the one which makes the most sense right now where we are. And the biggest thing was all the models we would take would never be able to analyze any call because we don't speak English or we don't speak Hindi. We speak a mixture of all languages. So it would probably work for 40% cases, 50% cases, but nothing that you could do automatically. So that's why I said I'm at this stage, given the hallucination problems and where we are, we use AI mostly as a suggestion or a prompt for our customer service people, and that has worked well for us. I didn't have the courage to put AI directly in front of the customer as of now.
What about you, Vishal?
So I think there are a lot of entrepreneurs here in the fintech space. If you all put your hand on your heart, I think this is still a very open space in which the fraud, the cyber security issues, what youngsters are facing, what the elderly are facing, those who do not understand the payment space completely. I think this opportunity, some players are trying to come with some sort of cyber insurance or products around that, but I think it's still quite open. A lot of you can go back and think, hey, how can I crack this? It doesn't require a big team. This requires a small team to think that this is a way that this can solve for the government, for players as big as them, and bring a solution to them. I'm sure they'll be very, very happy to say that if this is a workable solution, if this puts trust on a brand beyond a PCI DSS certification, then yes, we are immediate buyers. So I think that's a huge opportunity, blank space, not blank, let's say maybe 20% covered right now. And yes, I'm sure the government will also support something like this because it's a huge headache for the government also right now.
So, what about you, Karthik? Anything crazy has happened? I'm sure in 25 years you'd have seen many things.
So I would like to have a lot more crazier things happen, but just to give a little perspective, I know the topic is safe payments, but again, I go back to the elements of payment processing, right? There are several things that partners are doing and as customers we are using, that borderline between what Visham was explaining as trenchant data analysis, applying algorithms on top of it, and then having automated decisions that help you improve or correct a certain problem area in real time. And some of the examples here are observability in terms of what's really happening to different parts of the system. Where is the network choking? Where is load suddenly increasing? Where are errors going higher than a certain threshold? Where is a choke on bandwidth happening, and so on. And today, the AI tools, etc., that we use allow us to get these signals in real time, and then there is a human, a cognitive component of somebody, looking at it and then either altering it or allowing it to, self-correct. But the next leg of AI, I would think, would be where, you're able to, it is a different kind of, it's an AI architecture. It's not a traditional transaction architecture. As a part of that AI architecture, stakeholders are just simply asking questions. Hey, look, what happened to customer support queries yesterday? Did it spike? And the AI platform is actually responding and saying that, between 12 p.m. to 3 p.m., we had a spurt in queries because a particular underlying partner was not functioning, but they got solved by 4 p.m. because we were able to self-correct and route it differently. So I do think that today's AI allows for a lot of self-discovery, good amount, but the human component is necessary for you to take a call and decide. Even your database does a lot of AI that you're probably not aware of. But you let it do some things, but you don't let it do many other things because it might not really work. So we are a little away from that point where we leave everything to AI, but yes, the path is clearly set.
Well, I have a crazy story. I mean, about 12 years ago, we launched face recognition. It was very new in India. So this was for an insurance company. So a lot of the insurance agents were supposed to sort of download that app and verify themselves. It was a very simple pre-AI, you can call it, but at the time it was like sort of cutting edge. So there was a lot of complaints from Delhi circle, so I had to sort of book a flight. And they told it was a Moto G phone, so we were pretty sure it was working because we tested it enough. So I booked a flight, went to Delhi, and then called the agent, who was complaining a lot. And then we opened the phone, and then I opened the app, and then it wasn't working like black. And then we realized there was no front camera. So it's like, I think we're at a very primitive stage where I think a lot of mistakes will happen before we actually get to a stage where it's really rock solid. But I think we're not talking 10 years from now or 20 years. I think it's going to be months or maybe a couple of years. We are actually going to see really rock solid AI agents which can handle maybe more than billion transactions a day. So we still have a couple of minutes left. So if there's any questions from you guys, so just fire away, please. Go on, please.
We've seen online that there's a lot of innovation in payments in China, that we see that they're trying to scale things like payment via fingerprint or payment via an iris scan. Do you think there's any feasibility as far as the Indian ecosystem is concerned that we will ever be able to scale something like that in terms of payments in India?
Very true. I mean, I've seen that somebody walking into a supermarket in China, buying stuff, and then just standing in front. Like 4 feet, it's scanning my iris. Oh, that's mesmerizing. So do you think we're going to see something like that here?
But I don't know if you've already experienced DigiYatra. We're already there. Whether you want to link it to payments or not is another story, but we're already there. So because we have, if you have attended the Aadhaar session, you will figure out that Aadhaar is now moving much more to face recognition based authentication rather than fingerprint, because it does not require a device. You can do it on the customer's device. Of course, you have to secure it and you have to make sure that the privacy is there. But if you can do it at airport checkout counters, you can do it anywhere else.
Yeah, I've also seen that the Aadhaar, PAN, and the other voter ID linking is quite difficult because, I mean, we have different names, right, in India. So we have initials and first names, last names, and so on. So now they're actually thinking of face matching. So, you don't really have to worry about names, that you'll still be able to sort of link that. So all good. Any other questions? Yeah, please go ahead.
We can hear you, Esa, by the way.
Go on.
Interesting session, Kunal this side. So basically just trying to understand, so it's all about generating a pattern. So when we say fraud transaction, there is a pattern which goes behind. The people who are doing fraudulent transactions, it's all about pattern. So this 0.01% or percentage of fraud transactions which are happening, or lesser than that, whatever is the case, is it possible that in the future, as the AI advances, it matures, and definitely the more awareness is created among the people also, and among the consumers also, is it possible that it will be the fraudulent transactions can be completely eliminated because of AI? That possibility is always there, or do you think again it will take maybe 2 years duration, 3 years duration, 4 years duration? What is the time frame which you put in basis the understanding of this AI ecosystem?
I don't think that's going to happen. That's my view. Because if you can use AI to figure out how to prevent frauds, the fraudsters can also use AI to figure out how to do. So it's always going to be a cat and mouse game.
I sort of suppose that. Much like, I mean, if you go back, we had this Disney creations, right? I mean, it was on paper, and then it moved into digital sort of Disney pictures, and we were worried what was going to happen to creative people. But creators have become more expressive now with technology, right? So similarly, I think we'll solve for the current social engineering problems with AI, but we don't know what the fraudsters are going to come up with next, and it's always a catch-up game that the banks, insurers, and telcos will have to do. So we'll wait and see. I think some of it will be solved, but new things will emerge. I think the human creative powers are like sort of double-edged. We can both solve, and we can also create these fraudulent patterns.
I think it's an ecosystem of multiple, like it's not only about payments. When we say safe payments, it's safe payments, but then there are ecosystem participants like the telecom operators, and then there is social engineering.
True.
So many other elements are also there, and so much less of regulation. So cumulatively, it becomes a bigger problem compared to the AI.
True. Much like the bureaus, I think we need insurance bureaus, we need telecom bureaus, and everybody should be willing to share data, but it's not happening yet. We'll see. Very good. Thanks for your question. Yeah. Please go ahead.
So actually, we are running out of time, but yeah, final question we'll take.
Hello, I'm Sanjog. A quick question. So, solving for fraud detection, there is one part wherein people are building models or mechanisms through which fraud can be, or those fraudulent links can be detected. The other part is where banks or fintechs have to build this really sophisticated in-house infrastructure, real-time systems. My direct question is building that infrastructure for real-time fraud detection or credit decisioning systems also a challenge, because of which most of the small to medium-sized banking and fintech organizations are not picking up on this particular initiative?
So I'll answer a bit of, it's a mix of those two questions. I'm sure youngsters would know this company called NVIDIA. So the chips that are being built on AI over there is to just faster process everything. What used to take a second would now take super nanoseconds into nano. And so these are expensive things to, as infrastructure to buy. They're obviously extremely costly. To reduce it from 0.0101%, it requires a multiplication of the infra and the intent and the bureaus all put together. But yes, right now, I think lesser intent in India around that. But down the line, I think next year itself, you'll see a lot of people investing to ensure that, hey, I am protecting my client, and that's why I have to invest on my infrastructure a lot more than what I'm currently doing. People are making an effort, but it has to go to a different level altogether to make that as a differentiator. It is expensive right now. It will come down because the Indian ecosystem is also encouraging that. Today morning, Economic Times has a $2.5 million investment by the government into one of such companies. Yeah.
We are out of time, so round of applause for my panelists, please. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I request the panel members to please, yes, we would need a picture of you, yes, after this session. All right, ladies and gentlemen, session filled with profound knowledge and insight comes to an end. It was an extraordinary experience and an engaging discussion here. Thank you so much for being a part of this brilliant session. We extend our warmest thanks to our valued speaker, moderator, and the audience who are present here. Has been a privilege to have your company at the Global Fintech Fest 2024. And once again, thank you so much to our speakers, the moderator, and you people, thank you so much for making it a successful session. Now it's time to thank our gracious sponsors for this particular session. Registration partner M2P, Fintech VCPE partner Westbridge Capital, Platinum partner Financial Times, Gold partners MobiQuick and MongoDB, Silver partners Aditya Birla Capital and Pure Storage, and Credit Innovation partner Experian. Ladies and gentlemen, coming up, session number 5, and it's time to turn our attention towards this session. The topic for this session is advancing cross-border payments and financial inclusion. And let's warmly welcome our esteemed moderator and speakers for this upcoming session. First up, this session would be moderated by Mr. Parag Mukherjee, Director, Digital Enablement Financial Services, KPMG. Yes, we need some applause here, come on. And let me introduce the speakers here. First up, Mr. Jens S., CEO, Currency Research. Ms. Lilan Chi, CEO, ZeloPay. Mr. Trevor Tay, Senior Vice President, Nuvi. And Mr. Martin McCain, Senior Vice President, Partnerships, North America, OTT Pay Inc. Ladies and gentlemen, with your applause, let's welcome the panel here. We are about to begin the next session. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. Hello. Thank you everyone. So we'll start the discussion. So the topic for today's discussion.
May I request everybody to please settle down so that we can start the session. People at the back, if you want to be a part of this session, please take your seats. So please, you can continue. Thank you.
Thank you. So what we'll try to cover over the next 45 odd minutes with my fellow panelists is how does cross-border payments impact financial inclusion globally? What are some of the challenges that we see cross-border payments facing globally? And how can technology along with regulatory interference and policymakers, how can we all come together and make cross-border payments secure, fast, and cheaper so that globally it can be accessible to a lot more people and it can drive financial inclusion. So thank you all my fellow panelists. So we'll start with cross-border payments. So globally we see cross-border payments as something which has seen a lot of traction. Today, cross-border payments is something that has been disintermediated by a lot of technology players globally. However, there are some very basic challenges that still remains to be fixed. One, cross-border payments still are very, very expensive. Average cost for a cross-border payments today is still in excess of 6 to 7%. And also, the other challenges that we face with respect to cross-border payments is around transparency around fees, transparency around the current tracking and tracing of the international payments. And number 3, how can we bring around financial inclusion through cross-border payments? So maybe we'll start the discussion and see what are the current challenges which customers face today while trying to remit international payments globally. So what are the challenges you have seen across different parts of the globe? Yeah, sorry, over to you. Maybe we can start with Trevor.
Hi, everyone. So I think you probably hit on a couple of points that are pain points for consumers, one of which is transparency and pricing. This is particularly challenging because oftentimes the price point, the amount that's transferred is not thousands of dollars, thousands of euros, it's actually hundreds. And when you have typically a fixed cost model, that's set up for effectively larger average transaction value, you're at a disadvantage when we talk about pricing from an emerging markets perspective. I think part of what I'm optimistic about is players that come in and look at the business cases for the remittance corridors and see that these very large margins that exist because you're an incumbent can be challenged by fintechs. So when you hear of 6, 7%, 600, 700 basis points of margin, that is a ridiculous amount of money. In my world, I deal in acquiring low, I mean, we can even go to single digits because of the volume.
Absolutely.
So again, it's a scale business that attracts, and the ability to scale will allow you to obviously get those scale economies and drive the P&L. So I think that's part of the solution. Pricing has to also be, I think, predicated on that infrastructure that enables this. And again, there's a role for regulators to be involved. Those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you, Trevor. Martin, your views, please.
So my perspective is a little bit different. The world that I live in at OTT Pay is a consumer to merchant play, like acquiring business. So if we talk about some of the barriers or some of the costs, we have a similar low margin. I mean, at the end of the day, hauling a transaction through a rail is a commodity. It's like long distance telephone rates. It's what you wrap around it from a value add perspective. What's the benefit to the merchant and what's the benefit to the consumer? So what OTT Pay is going to do is we're going to bring UPI to North America to allow Indian consumers to shop either on e-com, excuse me, or in a brick and mortar environment. So the value proposition to the merchants in North America is pretty clear, especially in the e-com space. For example, put UPI on your checkout and now you've got 1.4 billion people around the world that can access your location. So that value tends to translate very easily to the merchant, where there's less focus on, say, what's my Visa rate, what's my MasterCard rate. So that's really how we differentiate ourselves.
Sure. Thanks. I think that was informative. Lee, what do you see some of the challenges for cross-border payments in APAC and especially probably in Southeast Asia?
I'll probably speak specifically to Vietnam, which is the market we operate in. So we are both on the issuing and the acquiring side. On the issuing side, we have half of bank users in Vietnam actually using our platform to make payment. However, only 6% of our users have credit card. And if you're a Vietnamese user who want to go abroad and make payment, if you don't have a card, the only way you can make payment is you go to a national bank in person, try to get currency in cash, and then go pay. So that's a problem we're trying to solve. And the biggest challenge there is not tech. The tech is very easy. We can do it in a month, right? But regulation. So in Vietnam, only in July this year that the state bank has created more clarifying regulations for us to kind of now start figuring out the fund flow to enable that outbound payment. On the other side, as an acquiring player, we see is a problem where Vietnam is a very big inbound tourism spot. Actually, more and more Indians are coming to Vietnam, and some of it is for destination weddings. But people coming in having a lot of trouble with paying to SME merchants. And I see that as a huge opportunity for us for financial inclusion, how to help our SME merchants take payment from tourists. Right now, the only way they can take payment is either through cash or you pay 2.5% to the card rail, and then you probably don't even have money to buy the post machine to begin with. So that's something we want to work on.
Sure, that was informative. Jens, so over to you. What do you see some of the challenges in Europe and also globally in terms of cross-border payments?
Well, Europe and globally is very different, of course, with Europe having the SEPA region and the euro. But looking at it globally, I completely agree with you. Regulation is actually the hardest nut to crack because technology can do pretty much everything. And there's so many promising technology projects in the pipeline from the BIS, for instance, doing a lot of initiatives showing what technology can actually do in the FX space. But as long as then you'll have to have lawyers and governments and regulators spending years to agree on the terms to connect different countries. That's really the biggest challenge I see in the cross-border space. And that's not even an original thought. I think that was also pointed out by one of the BIS projects that was looking at connecting CBDCs, Enbridge, saying technology-wise, this is all really easy, but when it comes to the legislation and the regulation, that's where a lot of work has to be done.
Sure, thanks. So we'll take this discussion forward because it's very interesting. Because there is a greater role to be played by the central banks for each country and also the policymakers to ease the cross-border payment challenges. So we have seen certain initiatives being taken by banking financial institutions like Jens mentioned about BIS and also G20 nations. They had come up with a roadmap to ease out cross-border payment challenges. And having said that, what still remains a larger experiment to be seen in terms of getting unfolded is how can central banks come together and solve this kind of problem? Because today, if you see majority globally, a lot of the payments significantly gets executed through SWIFT. So there's a heavy dependency on SWIFT, and those payments are getting expensive by the day. So there are certain initiatives that we have seen. So for example, bilateral engagements between multiple countries, connection of real-time payments. So for example, India and Singapore coming through together, UPI Pay Now. Similarly, Thailand and Singapore, Prompt Pay and Pay Now getting connected to try and bring about real-time payments across cross-border. However, that isn't helping globally because it's just about a bilateral arrangement between two banks. This would be successful only when a number of countries come together and try to bring up a multilateral cross-border payments framework using which multiple countries can participate in this kind of a real-time payment scheme. So there are certain initiatives taken by BIS, like a Nexus, wherein 5 or 6 countries came together, and they were trying to build a multilateral cross-border payment settlement scheme, which obviously users from the participating countries could use. And then we see a similar initiative in the Nordics region with P27 coming to force. GCC in the Middle East was another initiative. But what do you think are some of the challenges, why such initiatives have been far and few, and why we haven't really seen the success that probably these multilateral arrangements were expected to have? So maybe we'll start with you, Jens.
Okay, sure. Well, first of all, I think it's because there hasn't been a lot of focus on cross-border payments until recently. I think it's really only since the G20 put out the roadmap and the CPMI put cross-border on as a headline, really on something to focus on. Nobody was looking into cross-border a lot, and worse, actually, there was an increasing problem with the compliance issues in the cross-border space and de-risking. That a lot of players put out of the market, that you were reliant on fewer and fewer correspondent banks, that there was a whole second and third tier of cross-border payments being created as a result that was hard to regulate and still is hard to regulate. So I think historically nothing or very little has been done about this, and it's really only the last few years. And to be fair, if you look at what has been achieved in the last few years, there's a lot of promising stuff in the pipeline. But of course, creating an idea and then building a prototype is so much easier than rolling out across the globe. So I think the reality is short term, we will still see a lot of regional initiatives that will make a difference, like connecting QR codes in Asia. That's a great thing that was done pretty quickly. Nexus
great promise, but that's going to take time to roll out across the globe. Then there's Project Mandala, for instance, in the pipeline as well, looking at making it easier to interpret existing regulation. So I think there's a lot of really good stuff happening, but it's going to take time, realistically.
Sure. Good. So how do you see it, Lee, in terms of the market regulations? Because Southeast Asia has been one of the pioneers in this way, because Pay Now and Prompt Pay from Singapore and Thailand were one of the pioneers to take this step. So how do you see it growing in the region?
I think these are positive steps, but I think the scope of this bilateral arrangement has been limited to the banks, right? And for example, Vietnam and Thailand actually has done this, but it's only inclusive of the banks in Vietnam that are able to do this. The problem I see is that by excluding fintech, you're actually limiting the innovation that can come in. Laying down the pipe is just the first step. If you ask consumers in Vietnam today, are they aware that they can use their bank apps to make payment in Thailand? Most people don't know, right? So you need to do what the fintech tend to do well, education, rewards, how you actually bring the offerings of merchants in Thailand, for example, into the hands of consumers in Vietnam and let them know that if you go to this store in Bangkok, you will get this discount, right? To actually push and promote that spending. I think these are some of the things that we can do, and then we layer on credit products to enable people to do BNPL when they travel abroad. So it has to go much beyond just laying out the pipe that you can now scan. The other part is more nitty-gritty, I realize, is that there's not a standardized stack of tech. So we try a pilot with a partner, and then because there are different bank apps that can scan our QR code, we get a lot of different error codes back, and we don't know how to interpret it, to tell the merchant that this is what's going on, or tell the user that this is how you troubleshoot it, because every bank has a different type of error. So I wish some organization can help with that standardization.
Thank you, thank you. Trevor, your views on this?
So I think the point there is that consumer adoption is not a given, is absolutely valid. I would say, in general, I agree that fintechs do that better because they're much more focused. But I've seen a lot of banks begin to move there too, nudged by the competition of the fintechs. I've seen this in the UK, I've seen this in France, et cetera. In general, I think if you think about, without going to market with a clear consumer proposition, you're just wasting your money, you're wasting your investment. And I think the more successful models, particularly around, we say about financial inclusion, it solves a problem and it gives you something more. It's not just that access that's sufficient. So I think, again, markets like Thailand, Vietnam, where we have this proliferation of these apps, I think there's a bigger story to be told there that's to be written.
Sure, that's insightful. Yeah, Martin, over to you.
From the merchant acquiring perspective, the benefit that OTT has is we launched Chinese QR code-based digital payments about 8 years ago. So we already have an established model of how to bring it to market. And the number one lesson that we have is that we don't fully understand the Indian consumer, which may sound kind of silly, but if you go in assuming that a Chinese consumer is the same as an Indian consumer, it's just not true. But the go-to-market strategy, there's a couple different prongs. And I'll skip right to the merchant. So you can either be passive for awareness, or you can be active, and we have merchants that do both. So what do I mean by that? By passive, so we have the duty-free shops in Canada, as an example. So when you come into a duty-free shop, they literally corral you, and you walk through, and there's perfume and wonderful things, but they accept Alipay and WeChat Pay. Now, they have a sticker, so it's passive. But the power of that brand to that consumer group is the same as me coming to India and seeing a Visa logo. I associate certain feelings, and I'm comfortable with it. I trust it. I know my transaction's safe. It's the same for Chinese consumers. So apply that logic to say, UPI coming through a duty-free shop. As an Indian consumer, you know that brand. The other thing we do very, very extensively is we do active marketing. So we work and we bring customers' brands into China. we use China's social media, and we work with the different payment schemes to do promotions to drive consumers into the merchants' locations. So it's either option works depending on the type of business that you're in. So again, and the other comment I just wanted to make is so why our TR doesn't really apply in the world that I live in, but it's for us, our view of North America from the Indian consumer perspective is we see four constituents. The low-hanging fruit is your tourist and your student, right? That's easy. However, we view the marketplace also as members of the Indian community that live year-round, or citizens of the US or Canada, and the other one's e-com. So when you look at it from that perspective, the market opportunity is not just Indian shops. It's where Indians shop. So we use a lot of heat map technology to say, okay, so as an example, in Toronto, northwest of the city, there's a massive Indian community. So we have a furniture shop, a national furniture chain that accepts, in the case of the Chinese community, Alipay and WeChat Pay. But they have a location right in the middle of the Indian community, so they're like a prime candidate for UPI. So for us, it's a greenfield. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we're excited to work with our friends in India to bring that payment scheme.
Sure, that was insightful. So we all kind of agree that there's a lot of work to be done in the cross-border payment space, especially when it comes to central government, central banks, and the policymakers. And
can I just comment on that? So again, selfishly in the world I live in, for us it was, when we started our conversations about what's involved from a technology perspective to bring this payment into North America, and we were, for lack of a better phrase, I'm not a technical person, here's the spec, here's the requirements, here's the compliance requirements. So while they may be onerous for other businesses, for us, they were very clearly laid out, and we just adopt our technology to it. So I'm probably a little bit of a unicorn, and I don't have any complaints about your regulations and stuff like that, because we just had to adopt them. Now, if all of a sudden they were changing and things like that, it'd be a little more difficult. But I just want a shout out to, you guys got some pretty good tech specs they're easy to integrate to, so we don't have that pain.
Sure. So that gets us to the next question, which is essentially our most important topic of discussion today. And that is, how does cross-border payments bring about financial inclusion, right? So one of the key challenges globally that we are facing today is that of financial inclusion. Roughly today, when we talk about the numbers, almost 2 billion people globally are underbanked, right, or underserved by the banking financial services industry. Cross-border payments could be one of the driving forces to bring about the entire financial services inclusion. And that is because transaction records can serve as a basic history to kind of cross-sell, upsell other banking products and bring them as part of the mainstream banking ecosystem. So we wanted to hear your views around that and what have you been seeing in different parts of the globe. So maybe Jens will start with you.
Okay, sure. When talking about cross-border and financial inclusion, remittances are obviously the area to focus on, right? Because with remittances, you typically have cash-to-cash remittances. So where's the financial inclusion there, right? You're still stuck in your cash world. And even with new remittances offerings, they're mostly then linked to a bank account. So you're coming back into the underbanked scenario that the remittance might land in a bank account, but then the person still extracts the whole money to then spend it in cash. So I think that's really the area where new offerings, and especially fintech-enabled offerings, and I agree with you when it comes to education and adoption rates, etc., fintechs just play a different game. Again, there are some exceptions in the banking world, but most really make a difference there. So that's, I think, where it can make a massive difference to keep people in the digital realm, right? If the remittance, even if it initiates with cash to begin with, if that goes into a wallet, into something digitally enabled, that can be a real game changer. And hopefully it will happen on both ends. Depends, of course, on how you receive your money for those that send money back home, for instance, in the first place. But that's a completely different story. I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, over to you, Lee.
For us, there are a few ways. So remittance is one of the products that We don't ever advertise or do a promotion, and it grows organically month on month. There's a real pain point that we're solving for consumers, which is instead of receiving, so Vietnam is a big inbound remittance market as well. A lot of people live overseas or have family member overseas, want to remit the money back to Vietnam. And instead of using someone like Western Union, where you wait a couple of days to get that money, you get the money right away in your wallet, where you can spend or you can put into a money market fund or all of our financial service products. And the amount of money you can wire in can be very small with a lot less fee, so that's helpful. Then we're also helping, we have helped Vietnamese consumers with paying for services globally. Paying for offline service is something we're still working on, but at least for online, we've solved for it. So before, if you want to pay for Netflix, Google, Apple Store services, and you don't have a credit card in Vietnam, you're out of luck. So we enable that. I think the next frontier for us, like I said, is how we help SME merchants, taking that payment from tourists, and from there build a credit profile for them, and then we can do merchant cash advance as an example.
Yeah, Trevor, your views?
Yeah, I think there's still a role for government and regulation with regard to inclusion. So the problem of unbanked is oftentimes not just from a product offering. It's also the fact that there's habits or a lack of standards or uniformity. So when a government enables virtual accounts for all of its citizens, people in the ecosystem can add to it and multiply the benefit of that. So now that you have an account, that account can act as a remittance account that's a destination, or it can be a small merchant account with a mobile app. Our role from a Nuvei perspective is that we connect and offer 700 APMs, card acquiring, et cetera, in 51 markets. Those are useless without the consumer adoption. So the reason why we offer 700 APMs is because there's no single APM that everyone uses, not even PayPal, right? So as a consequence, the more consumers have some type of virtual account, it doesn't have to be a fully banked account, it can be an EMI type of account. That's just the start of building all of these additional services that can improve inclusion, offer new avenues, and open up the marketplace. So that for me is very exciting and interesting. But again, part of it is, look, maybe it's a big bang. Maybe it's not just, oh, this is a wonderful app. I'm going to share it with my brother. I'm going to share it with my family. That's too slow, right? So there's definitely, in my mind, a role for government, enlightened government, whatever you want to say. Very clear standards, support communication, right? This is the other thing that governments can do. They can very easily communicate. And that's a very important part of the whole adoption process.
Sure, thank you. Martin.
Trevor brought up the idea of APM, alternative payment methods, or alternative payment types. And where we found the traditional payment processors have put us in that category under ethnicity or culturally grouped payments. But we reside in there with crypto, we reside in there with BNPL, so it's a little muddy. But just coming back to your point about inclusion, I've had a couple of aha moments at this conference the last couple of days, listening to the whole genesis of how India's moved towards this whole digitization and towards cashless society, and it's fundamentally found in inclusion. And the irony is not lost on me, the fact that you've got a 60-year-old Caucasian, Scottish-born Canadian man sitting here talking to you about exciting new payments. But that's the point. The point is that I'm advocating for the fact that there are billions and billions and billions of transactions going to be done by people who don't necessarily look like me. So you talked about the unbanked, and that's definitely a key segment. But as people are also looking for alternative payment methods, and it may not necessarily be because they're unbanked. It may be just they don't have access to certain of the mature banking products. Plus the next generation's coming up. It's all QR code based. It's all digital based. I don't want your EMV card anymore. And the last thing I'll say is that, particularly when we're talking to the large multinational accounts, is when you get to the ESG level, the environment, social, and governance, from a branding perspective, being diverse and being inclusive is cool. It makes sense. It adds to their brand. So when we're talking to some of those type of brands, they're all over this. Particularly coming from a country like Canada, where it's ingrained in our culture. For us, it's blatantly obvious. And the last thing I'll say is that under the alternative payments, our campaign is about thinking beyond Visa and MasterCard. So as merchants look to find ways to sell more, Visa and MasterCard are, I'll oversimplify it, are more focused on opening new verticals. From a North American perspective, acceptance is saturated. There's no merchant that does not take a Visa or MasterCard. But when you talk to these merchants, by offering these alternative payments, they're offering another payment type, which makes it easier for the consumer to shop. And it's also inviting and inclusive to bring the consumer into your shop, especially if you market directly into those specific communities where their stores are. So we're totally all about the whole thing of inclusivity.
Sure, thanks. Jens, you want to say something?
There's little to add, I think, in the interest of time. The one thing I would want to come back to on remittances is it's not only that it's very cash focused, but it's also super expensive. So that's where I still see one of the key use cases to help those that suffer most from these high rates as well, because they have low income and pay high rates. That's a terrible combination.
So today, in terms of data, I think the average remittance cost is 7%. And so essentially, if you make a $200 transaction, you pay more than $10 in terms of your remittance fees, which is huge, right? So kind of average which G20 as well as BIS are looking to achieve in the near future is roughly around 3%. That's the threshold. So that's still higher. Now, talking about some of the potential in terms of getting the underserved banked is roughly today, there is $800 billion of revenue flows, which is inward remittance coming from migrant workers globally. And most of them gets distributed to the developing nations. Now, talking about that, so that's a huge opportunity, and a bulk of the recipients of the $800 billion remittance are today unbanked or underbanked at the best. So there's a huge opportunity for digital players who are in the remittance business, the remittance service providers, to take leverage of this data, history, and obviously the transaction amount to cross-sell, upsell other products, at least give them a basic savings account to start with, and see how you could offer other financial products like loans, credit, and insurance. So that takes it to the next question, which is, what are some of the use cases that you see could be leveraged by the fintech players and the remittance service providers to make use of the data to, one, provide alternate credit worthiness to these customers, potential customers, and number two, how do we leverage this data to cross-sell and upsell other products and make the entire population inclusive, financially inclusive? Start with you, Martin, this time.
So from my perspective, the data that we can scrape is very limited. We're basically just sending a package back and forth. However, the data that we do accumulate is, for, as an example, 50% of the consumer that walks through the major malls represents in Canada one of three groups. They're Chinese, they're Filipino, or Canadian. So we do it from that perspective and then market accordingly that way. But going beyond that into consumer level detail, we just can't do it because of the way the infrastructure is set up.
Trevor, your point on this?
Yeah, I can comment. I think I'm in the same business, I'm acquiring, and so the data is at a merchant transaction level. It's generally mass. But I think if you think about the credit scoring and all the traditional underwriting processes to enable value-added services for this set of effectively unbanked, you have a rich stream of data under a different set of transactions. These are typically remittance inbound, and if you see some consistency in that, it gives you more confidence in the creditworthiness. How are you going to access it? How do you score that? This is, again, I think a space for AI to deal with. Certainly fintech folks are more focused on this. I think that's probably my guess in terms of the direction of travel.
Sure, thanks. Lee, your views?
Yeah, as I mentioned, so initially the users on our platform, when they receive remittance, they will tend to spend very quickly or cash out. And over time, we try to cross-sell financial service products to them. So for example, money market fund is the first best cross-selling product. Because we said, instead of just spending all of it now, you can put the money into here where we pay you 4.7% annually, and you can use it, some of it to pay, and then the remaining you can keep the money there. Then after that, obviously that data is also factored into our credit decisioning, because if you see that someone has a constant and frequent stream of remittance to their account, that's a signal that maybe he or she has some sort of income from family members, and that helps with the credit decisioning.
Sure, thanks. Jens, your views?
Yeah, just maybe adding a different perspective on this. 5 years ago, I think we were on a trajectory actually to have a real game changer in this space, which was Libra. Of course, Facebook or Meta was announcing this white paper, Libra, and there's going to be a platform where suddenly 2 billion people would have access to a completely new, pretty much frictionless cross-border platform. Of course, they've gone in a horrible way about it when it came to the regulator engagement, and rather than getting regulators on board with the idea, really alienated everyone, and that's why it all went down the hill, from my perspective anyway. But I think that's a good example for, you don't even have to cross-sell products. There's a data that completely is built on, a business that's completely built on data, and they were going to branch out into payments. Whether it's a good or a bad thing, that's debatable. But I think there's so many use cases, and I think if someone goes about this in the right way, they could create a new platform like that and really implement a game changer.
Of course. So that's, I don't know how much time is left. Do we have enough time? Okay, 2 hours. So maybe we want to take a couple of questions. We just have to, yes.
So, I heard a couple of you talking about like UPI should be one of the payments. So like if you are in India, probably India would be one of the prospective, like there are a lot of prospective customers. So you have already enabled, if I want to purchase something from a merchant website or from an e-com player, who you would be providing the payment aggregation services. So you have already enabled UPI and other payment methods, or it is in process?
So a couple of answers to your question. So each payment scheme is different. So for example, Alipay and WeChat Pay have a certain requirements around licensing, who they give them to, who you don't give them to. NIPL, same thing. GCash out of the Philippines, the same thing. So it depends on country by country. So from OTT's perspective, there are payment types where we do have licenses, and there are ones where the licenses are preferred to go to a bank because of the settlement side. So we just adhere to whatever the requirement is and adjust our technology accordingly. So our plan for Q1 next year is to launch about 50 wallets. Again, our starting point was Chinese mobile payments, and so we are in discussions with our friends in India here about participating in that as well. So that's our timeline.
Some representative who's doing the, you have some representatives who are doing these discussions on your behalf in India, or you are doing it at your own?
No, so we're in direct conversations with your payment platforms.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, we try to absorb as much of it as possible, including the risk, because of financial stability, because it keeps costs down, and we can pass that cost on to the merchant.
Understood.
Do we have any more questions? Anybody? Right.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I think, so that's it. I think it was a very good discussion, insightful one, especially because we had representatives from various parts of the globe. sharing their thoughts and experiences on dealing with cross-border payments, what are the challenges, and what are some of the aspects that could bring around financial inclusion using cross-border payments. So thank you so much, my fellow panelists, and it was indeed a good discussion to have over here. Yeah, you may share your final thoughts if any of you want.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So may I kindly ask the panel to please step forward for